Okay, you're good.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our March live stream. Thanks, everybody, for joining at this new time, which we're testing out to see how it goes, to make sure that we are accommodating folks on the other side of the world. We want to make sure that we are not always putting it at 5 p.m. on a Friday Pacific time, because that's nighttime for a lot of people. So I have a little presentation. It's not as long as last time. I want to touch on what we talked about last time, and then some recap of what we've been working on over the past month and what we're looking at in going forward. So we have one question that came in from Brett around the kind of tools that we want to build in the future. So actually, Matt, how do you think we should do this? Should we do the presentation first and then jump into questions?
You could answer this question, and then we could jump in.
Sure. Yeah, so Brett here is asking about AI solutions, specifically trying to get rid of sentence mining. This is something that came up in one of the mod chats, and I've talked about with Matt a few times. So one of the issues that I see with sentence mining is that it's a retroactive process. So when we look at the process of learning, we have this current process of we prepare ourselves with some pre-made decks, and then we jump into real content and try and understand it, and we sentence mine from that to learn new words. But ideally, the way that it would work is you would learn a new word and then immediately see it in your immersion. So it would be a proactive process. And so in my mind, that's the ideal way that we would do this, and the way that we could speed up the process of learning directly from immersion. So rather than the existing method, which is we pull out words from sentence mining, learn them, put them into Anki, and then we continue to review them in the hope that we see them again later in the future, which if we're immersing enough should be possible, but sometimes isn't. And so the way that I would like this to work is that using an artificial intelligence tool and some analytics, we would be able to say, okay, you know these words already. You're going to watch this thing in 1 or 2 weeks, and you tell us that. And we generate a deck of words that is customized to you and uses example sentence either produced by an AI or taken from a sentence bank. And then you would learn the words, a week before you see them in the TV show that you're about to watch. And so in that way, you are priming yourself to notice. You're giving yourself the first piece of understanding of meaning, so that when you see the word in your immersion, you have that opportunity to immediately understand it in the context in which it's meant to be understood. And the theory behind that is that it would accelerate the acquisition process. So that's one idea that I had for how we could effectively use AI to improve the acquisition process. But there's a ton more. Matt, I don't know if there are any that you want to ideate on.
Well, in terms of sentence mining, I think that idea that you just explained is kind of the core of it. Like when you think about Morphman is basically a very primitive version of exactly what you just explained. And yeah, I think the thing with Morphman is that everyone who hears the idea is like, oh, that sounds really cool. Just the execution is really poor. And yeah, I think to get the execution to a level where, like for me personally, it would be really worth doing, it would probably require some artificial intelligence so that it can parse the language at a higher level. It can actually determine, if certain words have multiple meanings. It can keep track of that and know, like, okay, you're going to see this meaning of the word. So here's an example sentences that contains this word that is I+1 and also is being used in a particular meaning and things like that. I also kind of feel like part of me likes doing my reviews precisely because I've manually picked all the sentences and made them myself. So it's almost like I'm like going through this collection that I built myself, and I can like appreciate it, and that makes it fun. But I also feel like that although maybe you're missing out on something small by not having your Anki deck be something that you manually picked out, it definitely could be the case that the pros of taking the more AI automated approach once the technology is there would outweigh the downside of not getting to have your deck be something that you handpicked. But I think yeah, it'll be exciting to see how that kind of technology evolves in the near future. By the way, I also just want to say that I got a COVID vaccine yesterday, and starting yesterday evening, I started feeling really sick, and I woke up in the middle of the night last night feeling really, really sick, and then I went back to bed and woke up this morning, and now I'm like mostly back to normal, but I'm still a little bit out of it, so I apologize if I seem kind of spacey.
Cool. All right. Brett is asking a follow-up question. Do you feel that the same tech, once developed, could provide a curated exposure experience where you try and accelerate acquisition of already learned words by systematically exposing you to those words in new contexts? Yeah, I would say I hadn't thought about it in those specific terms, but there is an idea of being able to sort of map the words you already know and the meanings you already know, and then rate different content as to how comprehensible it will be to you specifically. So, you know, if we were able to automatically evaluate the subtitles from a TV show and say, oh, you know 90% of the meanings that show up in this TV show, compared to another TV show where you say, oh, you actually only know 50% of the meanings that show up in this TV show, then you could cater your TV watching experience or your reading experience to your specific level, and you could create a plan for how to level up one step at a time through one piece of content at a time. So if you go through one piece of content that improves your vocabulary, which brings down the difficulty of other pieces of content, and we can create that map where everyone could design their own custom immersion plan that is related to that is specifically focused on their level of comprehension in different pieces of media.
Yeah, and I think if we were going to do something like that, we'd have to be careful to set it up so that people don't feel like they have to watch a given show because it's what's most optimal, you know, and then they're watching the show like, oh, I hate it. How many more episodes are left? I just want to get through this because it's on my path. Like, we'd have to build some way in where at any time you can say, throw this show out and then rebuild my path from where I am now to my goal with new shows, so that there's not that pressure, because I think that could be really toxic. And also, the way that I interpreted the question was that a little different than what you just said, Ethan, where not necessarily using technology to come up with content recommendations, but actually maybe have some kind of system where content is like getting generated the first time by some kind of AI. And that, I think, is probably really far off. And even if it's just something like showing you sentences out of context that it thinks should be I+1 that it like generated to teach you, I also think that I mean, maybe something like that could take the place of Anki, but I don't think you could ever, like, the amount that you're going to be able to acquire from things out of context like that is limited.
Yeah, so I was actually talking to an NLP researcher a few months ago, and one of the ideas we discussed was having a chatbot where you could speak in your native language, it would parse that and then respond in the target language, so that you could learn words in context through a artificial conversation that is simplified to your level. And I actually saw a new language learning AI tool out of Israel just a couple days ago, where they're essentially using chatbots in order to evaluate people's level of language ability and identify issues with their language ability. But they're using it for a traditional model, traditional education, where they can say, oh, this person doesn't understand the past preterite, and so we need to give them more examples of that specific grammar type, so that they can use it more effectively. But I think the core idea is good. I think their implementation is still traditionally minded, but if we could take that and apply it to a purely comprehensible input-based system, that would be really valuable for beginners who are still in that phase, that stage 1, 2A phase, where they really don't understand very much, and they need that extra help to build up their comprehension. So
That's really interesting. Also, kind of weird, like learning a language by talking to an imaginary friend, but I
yeah.
can see it working.
Cool. So if anybody else has questions, feel free to add them to the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to just start our presentation for this month. Give me 1 second to get that going. Can you see that?
Yep.
Great. Cool. So last time we talked about the idea of having a voting system for content so that it would allow us to monetize and identify which pieces of content are the most important to do in what order. After thinking about it more and having feedback from the community, from you all on the live stream, I decided that it would not be a good use of our time right now, that we have a lot of other things that we want to get to that can bring immediate value to the community. And this voting system, while cool and interesting, is not directly relevant or necessary. So we decided to put that one on the back shelf, not think about it until maybe later in the future. But one of the major factors that I was trying to address back in the day, or a month ago, was how do we monetize while still providing enough free content that it doesn't stand in the way of anybody's learning experience? Because a lot of the members of our community are somewhat altruistic in wanting this knowledge to be out there and free. So I've come up with this structure of what should be free versus what should be paid. And with new pieces of content, we will categorize it under one of these areas in order to determine whether it's something that should be free or paid. So on the free side, anything that is necessary to learn the language, we are going to make sure it's free. We don't want money to be a barrier to actually learning. So that includes the language agnostic guides that are currently exist in the simplified guide that's in progress. That means access to the community that will always be free. But the new piece to this is we've decided that we're going to create quick start guides for every language. So somebody will be able to go to the website, see how do I learn French, how do I learn Spanish, and we'll have an article there with an explanation of how to get started. So a couple members of the community, like Brett in the Japanese community and Justin in the French community, have already started to write guides for their specific languages. So we would like to take those, clean them up, make them public ready. And that way, anybody who stumbles upon Refold or searches on Google and says, how do I learn this language, will find these guides, will get involved with the community, and they don't have to pay for anything as far as getting started, getting through that stage 1. And then beyond that, they have access to the whole community and the resource documents. So then the other aspect is volunteer work. We have a lot of amazing volunteers in our community, and we want to make sure that all of their work is not something that we are profiting from. We want that work to be available to the community. So anything that uses volunteer labor will be free. On the paid side, anything that we do for convenience sake, anything that we do for convenience sake, that means streamlined language guides and streamlined tools, i.e. the JP1K deck that we created last month. Those would be behind the paywall because from our perspective, those aren't necessary for the learning process. They just make it easier for the learner. And then the other aspect is custom help, Q&As, live streams, and then we're also thinking about getting into coaching. So the same way that Matt does coaching right now on an hourly basis, we would bring in coaches that are somewhat like what Matt does in terms of giving one-on-one and customized advice. But you could also think of them sort of like as an italki tutor, but specifically for comprehensible input and the Refold method. So all the things that we did in the past month, we did a lot of boring business stuff like finances and accounting and legal stuff. None of that really matters, but it's very important from a business standpoint. Did the JP1K deck launch and iteration on that. We released an alpha version of the Spanish 1K deck to the Spanish community. And the French community is actually volunteering to create their own 1K deck, and they've been working on that diligently over the past few weeks. We have been designing the patron side of the website. So right now there's the free side. We'll also have a patron side where you will be able to log in using your Patreon account to get access to all of our content in the future. The simplified guide got put on hold for a bit because of another big project that I'm going to talk about in a minute, but we're getting back to it now. And merch store is going to be launching next week. Right. We also have started to get into translation a lot more. We have a lot of volunteers. We already had a Portuguese volunteers, but now we have Spanish and German. So those teams are working together, and we're trying to create a consistent process for how we sync changes between the original site and the translations. So those are all things that we've been working on. But the big thing I want to talk about is Refold partners. So the last time we talked, one of the things I mentioned is that, I am studying Spanish, Matt knows Japanese, so we can do those two guides, but pretty much all of the other guides, we're going to need to find somebody to lead the charge for that language, specifically for that NLTL combination. So, the Japanese for English speakers guide can be written by Matt, but the English for Japanese speakers guide can't. Though maybe he could, we'll see. But the idea is that we would want somebody who is NL to teach other people how to learn a TL. And what this would look like is that we would actually create sort of new mats. So in the same way that Matt has been very popular in building his audience with Japanese learners on YouTube, we would be bringing in new people to build a YouTube channel for, say, Mandarin for English speakers, or English for Spanish speakers. And each one of these would have a dedicated person who owns that community, who owns the content for that community. So I can't announce who exactly we're talking to yet, but in our conversations, we have 3 verbal yeses. So this is looking like a really promising way to go, a really promising way to branch out into other languages, but we're not going to announce it until we have things signed in contracts, because that would be premature. So I'm very excited about that. I think that's the way that we're going to be able to grow into the future, really into other languages, and scale beyond just me and Matt. And then in the last slide, I just want to say that we are hiring an experienced web developer. We need somebody who can sort of own the technology. I unfortunately do not have the time to really sit and code for 8 hours a day. So if you know of any experienced web developers who are looking for work, would love to talk to them. Great. That is that. If you have any questions about it, feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, we will just continue the question and answer. So Katie posted, your chatbot idea is kind of interesting. Do you think speaking your NL during immersion would slow down progress by taking your brain out of TL mode? I'll respond to this because I think I said the original idea, but we've been pushing the idea of crosstalk for the past few weeks, where different speakers of different NLs speak their native language to each other in order to practice. And the results so far, at least the subjective results with people reporting their experience, have been really positive. It allows them to not worry about trying to create language. They can put all of their energy towards understanding and then just immediately respond in their native language. And so we'd like to actually build that up a lot more over time, or quickly, hopefully. And so the idea of having a chatbot doing that would, I think, just be the next level of this crosstalk idea. So no, I don't think it would take you too much out of your brain out of sort of TL mode. But Matt, I don't know if you have any other comments.
Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, the automatic language growth school in Thailand, which teaches through purely comprehensible input and seems to have really good results with their students, they encourage their students to speak in their native language in the beginning and not force output, and it seems to work pretty well for them. And I think just in general, to kind of speculate on the what's really going on is that for most of us, speaking our native language is virtually effortless. So it's like if I was trying to learn two languages at the same time. I'm trying to learn Spanish and French at the same time, and I'm like speaking French while to somebody who's speaking back to me in Spanish. That might create a lot of confusion because it might kind of scramble your brain because both speaking French and understanding Spanish are each first of all different parts of your brain, but then also things that require a lot of effort and you're still haven't mastered yet. But if you're talking about we're focusing on understanding your target language and then speaking back in a language that you've completely mastered and is completely effortless for you, then I don't really think it's going to take you out of the experience that much. At the very highest levels, I think that to like what I kind of feel like for my Japanese, for example, is that if I wanted to really take my Japanese to the next level, I would have to go through a period of time where I almost don't speak English at all and speak Japanese all day just to like fully get my style of thinking to cross over into a Japanese style, but I think that's something that only applies at like the very highest level.
Cool. So Claudia's asking, any current work on Refold branded immersion technology? So I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, Claudia. In terms of us building add-ons, basically trying to do the same things that Megaku is working on is sort of my guess of what you're referring to. And if that is the case, then no, we've been pretty content saying we're going to focus on content and let them focus on technology. We have a lot of ideas for how we want to use technology in the future, but right now, our focus is really more just about getting the word out there. That's where we see our role in the community. And, part of that process is creating the way I've been breaking it down is, creating the path to fluency, getting people on the path, keeping them on the path, and then simplifying the path. And so in terms of using technology to simplify the path or to get people on board more quickly, we're doing things like the optimized 1K decks because we think that'll have a really big impact on allowing beginners to get into the process of immersion learning. But a lot of those things are really just about content and are really just about the ideas and simplifying the ideas. We don't really need new tools at this point for most of the things, and I haven't figured out where our efforts would be best spent when it comes to actually developing technology to support the process. And I don't think we'll know that until we have more people go through the process of learning.
Yeah, I kind of feel like with the technology, all the low hanging fruit has already been kind of cashed in on when it comes to all the add-ons that you can make that would have a significant difference, but also not require a lot of technology. Like the stuff we were talking about at the beginning of the live stream about AI and like chatbots, like that's much more advanced technology compared to the add-ons that the community has created up until now, right? So I kind of feel like that's another reason why we've decided to not focus on that for now.
Cool. Hopefully that answered your question. Thanks for the question. Brizzle is asking, is there a goal to have Refold tutors, but instead of a typical tutoring session, it's comprehensible input based, like what we've been doing time to time in the Spanish server, like for businesses and such? Yeah, so this is an idea that's come up. There's sort of two different kinds of coaching that I've been thinking about, and we've been talking to a couple members of the community about. There's the coaching on the method, direct, question answering questions around like, asking clarifying questions around, how do I do this specific part of the method?
And helping people come up with a study plan is also a lot of what I do in my coaching sessions.
Right. So that's another aspect is, how do we customize the immersion learning experience to this person's life? So getting really granular into understanding how their life is set up and like where they can fit immersion in, and then like building an immersion plan over time so they can gradually incorporate more and more. And then there's the third aspect, which is having crosstalk like sessions where the teacher is speaking in their native language and the student is speaking in their native language. And that's sort of a extension of what we might see in italki. And so I think that is definitely something that we would like to get into eventually. Though I think the focus right now would be more on creating custom study plans. So coaching based on how you actually apply the method, because there seem to be a lot of folks who have difficulty taking the ideas and actually like applying it to their own lives. Whereas with the comprehensible input stuff and the crosstalk conversations, you can actually do that already on italki. You just have to tell the teacher that's what you want. So for us, maybe we want to support that later so we can bring everything into one house, but we are not interested in reinventing the wheel for something that's already available elsewhere. We'll just direct people to go there because our time is best spent creating new things or plugging holes that we see in the process. But if somebody else has already plugged the hole, we'll just send the learner over there. There's no reason for us to reinvent that wheel. Thanks for the question. Adoration for None asks, have you thought about seeking funding from national organizations? The UK has an organization called the British Council, which promotes the learning of English language around the world. Their revenue is over £1 billion a year, some of which I believe is used to fund other organizations. Seeking funding from them or another national organization may be a good way to expand your operation and provide more valuable materials for the community. Yes, we have thought about this, but I had not realized that the British Council does this. So I am going to write that down. Give me 1 second. British Council. Yeah, so there's a lot of governments around the world and organizations around the world that fund learning of their government or their country's language. So the one that I am most familiar with, just because I am Jewish and my dad moved to Israel, is Israel has. It's called the Aliyah program, where they bring Jews from anywhere in the world to live in Israel. And one of the aspects of that is they provide free Hebrew education. And so if we can come up with a better way to teach Hebrew, they are likely to pay for that. English in particular is a huge market for us. We definitely want to get into it, which is why translation has been such an important focus over the past month. And so teaching English to various different languages, we would need to create different guides for each of those. And so if we can get funding from the British Council to help build all of that out, that would be really beneficial. In my mind, this was more of a longer term goal because I feel like we need to prove that this works before we bring it to a government to fund it or to a organization that will fund it. So our focus right now is really just on proving that the method works. And then we would definitely want to get into those other sort of funding sources in the near future, because I think that's really going to be how we can accelerate the growth of immersion learning worldwide. So thank you so much for that suggestion. I'm definitely adding it to my to-do list to look into how that all works. Brett has another question. I was thinking about possibly doing content sprints for specific domains, slice of life specifically, since it's recommended as the first domain. So people have a long list of content to go to that they can be fairly confident is within the domain. Do you think this would be useful, overthinking it and probably not worth it? And if useful, any tips you would have for making it most useful?
I mean, yeah, that sounds useful.
Yeah, so I would say in the resource documents that we have, I put in sections for the different things that we specifically recommend. So, there's a section for slice of life content. There's a section for dubbed content with matching subtitles that is meant for a younger audience. because that's an important thing to have for beginners. So a section of slice of life native shows that are good for beginners is absolutely one of the categories that I have in there, in all of the documents that we would like to fill in, because having that list is going to be really valuable for any new learner that comes in who is trying to master that first slice of life domain. And I know that in the Spanish server, at least, we have one show that is sort of our gold standard of slice of life that we recommend to everyone. But if we could have a library of those, that would be really beneficial. So yeah, I think it's a great idea to have a content sprint for that. And thank you, Brett, for all of your hard work in collecting these resources. It's really made the community so much better, and it's made the process so much easier for learners. So just want to call out a big thank you to Brett for all of the work that he does for the community. Okay. It's the end of our current questions. If anybody else has questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. They can be related to language learning. They can be related to the business model. They can be anything that you like. They can be silly things. One of the YouTube comments the other day was, I don't think we've ever seen Matt's legs.
Yeah, I actually said that to my mom.
So once and for all, Matt, do you have legs?
Oh, well, actually, yeah, I sent that comment to my mom just for fun. Well, because actually it was like the double. It was someone says like, have we ever seen Matt's legs? Does Matt have legs? And then the reply to it was like, Matt doesn't have legs. So I sent both of those to my mom. She's like, oh, you should show them your legs. And I'm like, well, that would ruin the mystery. Actually, I think while you were giving your presentation, I got up and put this jacket on. So if someone was in the like gallery view, they might have seen me. Oh yeah, there is a video. Remember, there's the Q&A where I start off the Q&A jumping on trampoline.
Oh yeah.
So there you go. The true fans, they'll know.
All right. Cloudy is saying, borrowing a tip from esports organizations, many are focusing on entertainment content for brand building. Language communities tend towards being slightly dry, but I've seen a lot of success from people in the language world who make it entertaining or lighter content alongside the information-dense stuff. For instance, I found this community through Matt's VR videos. Any plans for Refold to dip more into this? That's a great question. Matt, what are your thoughts on fun, entertaining content?
I mean, I haven't given much thought to it. So, I mean, I guess, are you talking more, like, for example, the VR chat, it's peripherally related to language learning because I'm showing off the result of my language learning and my skill, but it's not actually teaching you about how to learn a language, right? Like, you can watch the VR chat video and not learn anything about how to learn a language. So do you mean more content like that, where it's just like exciting, cool, fun content that maybe gets people into the door with language learning? Or do you actually mean like entertainment content that actually teaches you how to learn a language? Like, for example, there's a lot of anime about various topics. Like there's an anime and manga called Bakuman that's like about writing manga. And if you read that, you learn a lot about writing manga. So you mean like we can make an anime like about a Japanese guy learning English, and you like learn all the steps through that? That could be pretty cool at some point down the line.
What I'd say is, yes, I think that we should make our video content a little bit more punchy and fun, even if it is educational. But yeah, our focus has definitely been more on the information dense, trying to teach folks. But you're right that in terms of actually growing the brand, entertainment is pretty key. So Matt and I are going to be working on our content strategy over the next few months. We're going to start building that out next week. So I'll make a note to make sure we do some entertaining things in the process.
Yeah, although I think we got one thing that we might want to think about is if the kind of non-bullshit, like we're just going to give you the information straight, if maybe that's something that attracts a lot of people to us because they're fed up with everyone else like trying to be entertaining. And like for me, sometimes when I watch a video that is like filled with lots of little gimmicks to try to make the video more entertaining, I almost feel like I'm being treated as if I'm a little kid with a short attention span, and it's almost insulting. I would rather them like assume that I don't need any of that stuff to stay engaged and to pay attention. So I think that's something to consider. I don't really know if that, to what extent that is what attracts people to our content or not, but it's just a thought that I had.
Yeah, Brett says we should get on TikTok. Brett, we might just hire you to start making TikTok videos about Refold, because I don't really ever play with TikTok. I occasionally go on there, but it seems like you're pretty embedded in it. So we'll have to bring you on as our TikTok consultant. Brizzle also suggests TikTok is a great place to sort of learn how to make educational content entertaining, because there's tons of teachers on there. So cool. Katie is asking if I meditate, and if so, have I seen any benefits to my language learning / life? Yeah, so I started meditating a little over a year ago, really because Matt kept talking about it. And so I started, God, that would have been December of last year, or 2 Decembers ago. And I read the book, The Mind Illuminated. I liked it because it was sort of this like step-by-step process, in the same way that, we're building Refold as a step-by-step process for language learning. I built up quite a bit until I was meditating about an hour a day. And that was a really interesting experience, and it's remarkably difficult. It's probably one of the more difficult things I've done in my life. Just sitting and doing nothing for an hour. And I would say it definitely helps with focus, though I think Matt has talked about this before. The amount of time that it takes to actually build up to the highest levels of meditation that really bring like the best results is not commensurate with the benefit that you get, like the level of focus that you get. So at a certain point, I just decided that the amount of time I was putting towards meditation was too much for my life. It just didn't fit in. So I dropped down. I still meditate probably 4 times a week, but I do it in smaller amounts, so 10 or 20 minutes. And I find that those really help me just to focus for the day. So just sitting and doing nothing and trying to calm down for 10 minutes in the morning is really beneficial for having the focus for the morning. And then throughout the day, whenever I find myself stressed or my mind is not working the way that I want it to, just spending 1 or 2 minutes meditating is actually really beneficial, just to refocus yourself, recenter yourself, and get back on task. So as far as recommending it, I would say you don't need to do like the hours and hours of meditation to get some benefit. You really only need 10, 20 minutes to start seeing some results. So my brain runs all the time, so having any way to calm it down is really beneficial for me personally. I don't know if you personally struggle with that, but if you do, then I'd say meditation is a great way to tackle that. Cool. So that is the last question that we have. Anybody else? Oh, yeah, you can write in the side chat here. I just have to check it. Brett is asking, what is on your mind right now? Because you seem deep in thought.
Me? I'm really tired.
Yeah,
because I woke up in the middle of the night really sick. And I'm like still pretty out of it. I'm thinking I want to go take a nap right now. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh. Sorry, it looks like I missed a question. The Max Senchi, I don't know how to pronounce that, but a question for you, Mac. Is the monolingual transition required to fully learn a language?
It's not required, but definitely helps. I've been making the monolingual transition for Chinese, and it's so cool. Like there's so many times where there's the bilingual definition will be like actually like especially learning Chinese and English, or even in Japanese. Like for me on my Chinese cards, up until recently, I would put the English definition and the Japanese definition, and that would help me kind of like cross reference and try to like intuit what the actual meaning is. But still, sometimes either the Japanese one or the English one would be like a list of like 3 or 4 different words or phrases, all of them slightly different, and sometimes all of them significantly different. And so it's kind of confusing of like, if this word means these 4 completely different things, what does it really mean? But then you just read the monolingual definition and it like immediately makes sense, and you just realize, oh, it means this one simple thing, but this one simple concept doesn't have a true corollary in Japanese or Chinese, and therefore they just give you the 4 like closest things, but all of them are kind of off. So in a way, it just really simplifies things, and it's so much more direct. And then you get to spend more time actually reading your target language. Like now, before when I would do my cards, I'd like read the Chinese on the front, and then on the back I would read the Japanese and English definitions. But now it's like all Chinese. It's really cool. So I don't know. I guess when I hear people say like, "Do I need to make the monolingual transition?" I to me it just sounds like they are asking for permission to not do it because either they've tried a little bit and they've struggled with it, or they're just very intimidated by it. And I would say it's definitely worth persevering. Like you can definitely do it. We explained a couple different ways and a bunch of different strategies that you can do it on the Refold site. And if it wasn't my experience directly now in 2 languages that it really makes the whole learning process more efficient, then we would have put it on there.
Yeah, and I would say with a language like Spanish, it's really easy to make the monolingual transition. You just start looking at the monolingual before the bilingual. So it's a super easy transition to do. So I recommend that all Spanish learners make that transition relatively early. I would even go so far as like early stage 2B or stage 2A even, just because it's pretty straightforward. And once you do it, it just becomes it is like Matt's saying, like it's just a cool experience to like no longer need to rely on English in order to learn the language. Cool. Thanks for the question. Sorry for missing it. Adoration for None is asking, have we met in real life? No, we haven't. We've only talked online because this entire Refold process has been happening during COVID. So neither of us have been traveling much. So when it's all over and I'm vaccinated and you're vaccinated, maybe I'll come up to Portland.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Brebanya. I've seen Matt say things like he doesn't like most Japanese novels or movies. Have either of you ever struggled with lack of immersion material where your desire to learn a language itself outweighs the actual desired usage of the language?
I don't recall saying that I don't like most Japanese novels. If I did, it was probably in the context of like, well, think about it in English. Do you like most novels in your native language? Do you like most movies? You would have to have like very low standards or like be very not picky to be able to say like, yeah, I like most movies. I'm just gonna go to the store, pick something off the shelf randomly, and I'm gonna love it.
Hey, some people do like that.
Some people, but it's not. I wouldn't say that's the norm. So it's not like when you say like, oh, Matt doesn't like most Japanese movies or most Japanese novels. It makes it sound like I'm super picky and like don't like Japanese content. Whereas most Japanese people don't like most Japanese novels or most Japanese movies. That's just the nature of like. First of all, there's that rule of like 90% of all media is crap in every language, and then just with taste, we like some genres, not other genres, and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of like. To answer your question, no, I never had trouble finding immersion content in Japanese. I always had a list of content I wanted to consume that consisted of things from all mediums, novels I wanted to read, movies I wanted to watch, animes I wanted to watch. And the longer I learned Japanese, the longer the list of stuff I want to consume got. So like for every 2 shows I would watch, I would find 5 new shows that I wanted to watch. And it never went away. because basically the more time you spend in the language, the more like pockets of the culture that you discover, and the more pockets of pop culture that you discover as well. So, you find a movie director that you like, you want to go watch all his movies, or you find that there was this cool fad in the 90s that there's all these really cool shows that you want to go watch. So my experience is the more time you spend in the language, the more you discover new content that you want to watch.
Their follow-up question, they say, sorry, they weren't trying to call you picky. They were just asking because they are struggling with this sometimes.
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, the other thing is that for me, I know in Japanese, my tastes were pretty different than they were in English. Like, for example, part of it is that I always just had a hunger to understand Japanese culture and Japanese as well as I could. And so this naturally led me to be interested in Japanese history, because I saw that Japanese history was so intertwined with Japanese culture. So before I got into Japanese, I was never into history really at all, any world history. But I became interested in history through studying Japanese. And then I started watching historical dramas because I realized, like, oh, it's pretty cool when you think about it, that there's it's fictional, but it's based on things that really happened. And also you learn a lot in the process of consuming it. And so I got into historical dramas as one genre that I wasn't into in English. And there were a lot of things where maybe in English I wouldn't have been interested in it, but just because it was significant within Japanese culture, that made me interested in it. Like, I went and watched a lot of old famous TV shows just because they were regularly referenced in Japanese culture, and I wanted to get the reference. So, also in a way that helped me have a wide range of things that I was interested in. But yeah, I mean, I think if you need more content, like, for novels, look for other like, if you have an author you like, look for other books by the author. If you have a movie that you like, look for other movies by that director. And you can Google like similar authors or similar directors to a certain director and things like that, or like ask a native speaker friend for like recommendations. I think that type of stuff might be able to help you out if you're like suffering from a dearth of content.
The other thing that I would add to this is sometimes it takes a little while to get used to a new genre, a new type of content. So I really had this issue with telenovelas in Spanish because they're filmed like soap operas, and just the way it looks makes me not like it because I just associate it to soap operas or like it's too dramatic and I like can't, it just feels too cheesy to me. But then, if I spend 10 hours watching that type of content, I stopped noticing the way that it looked. Now it just looks normal to me. And the drama, yes, it's over the top, but it's like, so is sitcom drama. So, and I imagine that, if someone was trying to like get into anime, it takes a little while to get used to that style of acting. So there's, if you're watching something and you like viscerally don't like it, sometimes it's just an issue of, you just need to get used to it. And then once you're used to it, you'll actually really like it.
Yeah, actually, a lot of times when a piece of content felt corny or just really bad, I would assume that I just wasn't getting it, and I would like blame it on myself instead of the content, and that also kept me consuming a wide range of content. Whereas kind of after the fact, when I kind of left my hardcore Japanese phase, I kind of looked back on a lot of content being like, oh no, that wasn't me not getting it. Wasn't very good. But yeah, that belief was actually beneficial while I was in the process.
Cool. Thanks for the question. Hope we provided some tools that you can use to help you work through that. Brent is making a comment, not a question. He's saying, it seems like there is potential for a simple system within Discord to enable people to find crosstalk partners, not even necessarily anything paid. A system like this guarantees a shared philosophy as opposed to having to find somebody on HelloTalk and then having to sell them on the idea. Perhaps this is better suited for once the community grows beyond predominantly English speakers. Yeah, this is, you touched on the exact issue, which is we need to get folks who are native language of one of the servers or one of the languages we support, and they're trying to learn English. We've been doing a lot of good crosstalk in the Spanish server, but all of the native Spanish speakers there are fluent in English. So they're not trying to learn English, though I think some of them are practicing. But yeah, once we are able to expand into other native languages, that's when the crosstalk stuff I think is going to really take off and allow us to sort of become a hub of doing that and finding those partners. So I think you're definitely right that it's something on the horizon for us. Adoration for None asks, Matt, what stage are you currently at in Chinese?
I would say 2B overall.
Did you just start 2B or are you like
No,
nearing
I'm
it on 2C?
probably like in the midst, like maybe approaching 2C.
Cool. Holman Boy 5 asks, do we know if we are past level 1 of Japanese Refold once we have finished the JP1K deck?
So I know in the guide for each stage we have criteria for how you know you're done. Was Ethan? Do you remember off the top of your head what the criteria for stage 1 was? Was it just
Yeah,
that you
so
learned the most common words and have the habits in place?
yeah, it's not even that. For stage 1, you're like getting started with grammar, you're getting started with vocab, you're getting started with immersion. But the criteria to move up to stage 2A is just that you are consistently immersing in your target language without native language subtitles.
Oh yeah.
You don't even need to finish the JP1K deck before moving to 2A, though it can be helpful, obviously. So the goal of stage 1 is really just to get all of your habits in place, get you started on the path for everything. And it's particularly difficult for Japanese because you have to learn kanji and you have to learn a little bit about pitch accent, and the grammar is so different. So folks who are learning Japanese tend to stay in stage 1 quite a bit longer than folks in Spanish who can really jump to 2A almost immediately. So it's really up to you to decide, okay, now I'm ready to move into 2A, which is I'm going to actively start sentence mining and reading subtitles and all of that. But once you feel ready for that, just move on.
Yeah,
There's
you
no
can start that
specific
anytime.
criteria.
It's really 2A where the levels start being based on, or the stages start being based on your actual ability. So like, there's a lot of leeway when it comes to choosing when you're going to start the 2A steps, but when it comes to moving from 2A to 2B, that will actually depend on your comprehension. So it's clearer and it's less flexible, I guess.
Great. Hopefully we answered your question. All right, so I think this is the last question in the chat we're going to take today. Any slice of life you would recommend? I'm guessing they mean for Japanese.
I mean, there's kind of anime versus drama for the slice of life. And I mean, it's kind of hard for me to say because when I was basically going through the equivalent of stage 2 in Japanese, that was so long ago. I used to have very different tastes back then than I have now. I used to like watch K-On! And other like kind of not very plot heavy shows that now I don't think I would ever be interested in watching. So it's kind of hard for me to say, to be honest, off the top of my head. If I could open up my drama or anime folder, then I could probably look through and come up with some stuff. But I'm sure if you check out the Refold server, they'll have a lot of recommendations.
I want to change the question and ask, what was your favorite Japanese TV show to immerse with?
Like when I watched it, it was like my favorite show.
Mm-hmm.
I like the show Aoi Hono a lot. It's a drama. Okay, let me open up my folder then. Just have to make sure I don't show anything on the screen that I wouldn't want to show. But it's like hard for me to remember off the top of my head without having a list. Let me see. Nigeru wa Hajida ga yaku ni tatsu. I really like that show. That's probably one of my favorite shows. And let me see. I mean, Ikebukuro Westgate Park was good. That was like Katsumoto's favorite show. So back in the day, me and all the other age outers watched that, and it's pretty good. I also haven't seen it in a while though, so I don't know what I'd think of it. In if I watched it now, but yeah, and then there's tons of good anime. You know, Death Note. I'm like just looking through my list of anime random shows that popped into my mind.
I think we're good. I think the
Okay.
two recommendations you did, that was good. Cool. Um, anyway, so that is the end of our March live stream. We hope that you enjoyed it and that you got some questions answered. We'll be hosting this again in another 4 weeks, and we'll have more updates for you. So prepare your questions, and we'll see you all next time.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody, for being online.